Lesson 34. In the previous lesson, we learned how to say teacher. That's the noun magister and the feminine noun magistra. And now we're learning the verb for teach, and that's dokeo, docere.
It's related to such words in English as doctor and doctrine, and a person who guides you around a museum, a docent, or if we say it the Latin way, just like the third person plural, docent. But when you're saying it in English, say docent. People will know what you're talking about then.
For me, Michael, it always helps to find related words. If I can think of words that are related to other words, it helps me remember what the words mean, and it helps me remember the root words.
And that's a good strategy. Another thing I used to help with my students is I always tell them that, especially if they like to make flashcards to study, to make sure they draw pictures. So if you need to draw a picture of a teacher teaching to help you memorize dokeo, docere, I'd encourage you to go ahead and do that too.
Let's take a look at our quick review before we move on. In this quick review, we want to remind you a bit about word order. Of course, we know that Latin has a very flexible word order, much more flexible than English.
That's right. But remember, flexible does not mean any way you feel like.
Right, we still have general rules or guidelines that we follow.
Exactly. So a couple of those general rules I'd like to talk about if I have a minute, Bill.
Certainly.
All right. Well, then, we're going to talk about two of them here. One is the order we want to put our verb and our subject in a sentence. Our English language is what's called a subject-verb-object language. We say, I give a gift to the dog. The subject, I, followed by the verb give, followed by the object, a gift, and we use an indirect object in that sentence, to the dog. But in Latin, the default, more typical word order would be to have the subject first, the object in the middle, and the verb at the end. So we might say, if we're talking about teachers and students for these last couple of chapters, magister discipuli librum dot. The teacher gives a book to the student. Now, I promise I talk about two things. So that's that first one, right? We have our default different kinds of word order. But let's talk about briefly emphasis. So sometimes Latin authors will move a word to the beginning or the end of a clause to make it more emphatic. And we've seen this with some of the pronouns, right, Bill? With, for example, ego and tu.
Yes, it's common in Latin for an author to emphasize a word by putting it as the first word of the sentence.
So, to give you a little bit of an example in English, we might, when we're talking about giving that gift to the dog, say, the dog? She gave a gift to the dog? We've moved the dog in our sentence up to the front as a sort of sentence fragment to use emphasis.
And there are other ways in English that word order can generate meaning. In fact, in English, we depend on word order to communicate meaning in the first place. If I say the dog is chasing the boy, and then I switch the words and say the boy is chasing the dog, I haven't changed the spelling of any words. All I've done is change the order, and now the sentence means something completely different. But in Latin, because we have noun inflections, that is, we have endings to nouns, you can put the same words in any order you want, and they're still going to mean the same thing.
Just maybe with a different emphasis.
Because the ending, yes, that's correct, because the ending of that noun, which is the direct object, will still have that same ending, whether you put it at the beginning of the sentence or at the end. So in Latin, a direct object is a direct object, no matter where you put it, and it's still recognizable as such. In English, that's not the case. If we move it to a different place in the sentence, it changes its function. So as a student of Latin, you need to understand that English processes word order in a different way than Latin does. In English, we depend on word order to express meaning. In Latin, they depend on the tag endings of the nouns to express meaning. And so the word order can be much more flexible while still expressing the same thing.